to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Tonight's episode is going to be a little different. I'm taking a different tact with this one because even though there's been some news to talk about as we get ever so closer, we're now just about inside a month away from the release of Superman on July 11th, and there was a big Entertainment Weekly story that came out today with some details that you probably don't want to know if you're trying to remain spoiler averse. No huge spoilers, just some details that you didn't get from the trailers and whatnot. And there's also some stuff going on with Disney finally completely owning Hulu after the 5-year deal that they had with Comcast Universal, and the whole thing about Warner Bros. Discovery splitting off and all that. There is some, news here and there to talk about in the midst of all the other craziness of the real world. But tonight, because of some recent announcement that was made just yesterday, I wanted to take this particular episode to pay tribute to my other podcast network, Squadcast Media. So those of you that are longtime fans and followed me from Squadcast Media, this episode is for all of us, truthfully, because I'm going to be waxing poetically for a little bit here with respect to that. And for those of you who listen to this show and you're not necessarily familiar with my previous podcasting efforts over at Squadcast Media, and if you're interested in the backstory that literally led to the creation of this particular podcast, then stick around because I've got some stories and some cool stuff that I definitely want to talk about here tonight. But before diving into all of that, always want to remind everybody listening to this show that this is part of the Flightcast podcast network, if you will. This show and all my other shows can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, whether it's the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts, you can find the Flightcast for sure. There's this show that comes out on Tuesdays. There is Flightbox, my TV review show that comes out on Thursdays. Stay tuned this week for my Marvel television catch-up as a prelude to Ironheart, which I will be talking about when that premieres on June 24th. So I'm catching up on all the Marvel TV that I have not watched. This particular Thursday, I will be talking about Hawkeye, because I rewatched it and finally finished it, and Echo as well. And in retrospect, with respect to Ironheart, I think that it was pretty timely to start with those particular shows, to be honest with you. I'll get into all of that on Thursday. And then following that, I do hope to catch up on both She-Hulk and Agatha All Along as well, and I might be able to throw Loki Season 2 into there. We'll see exactly how it goes. But Flightbox is on Thursdays, and then Flight Chat, the listener feedback show, is over the weekend. This particular week's episode is probably going to more than likely get recorded on Saturday, and will either be posted late Saturday or early Sunday because it's Father's Day, and obviously I'm going to be busy on Sunday. So stay tuned for that particular episode, your listener feedback, your emails, and your thoughts about movies, TV, and other sort of media this upcoming weekend on Flight Chat. And of course, also want to take a moment to thank all the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast that have stuck through and have, listened to all the bonus content. I have like almost 200 pieces of bonus content up on that Patreon, and there is more to come because just like I read Zero Year, in preparation for the Batman, I will also be reading Superman for All Seasons and All-Star Superman in preparation for Superman on July 11th. So those readings and episodes of Flight Report will be popping up on Patreon in the coming weeks, certainly before July 11th, or I guess in my case, before July 8th, because yes, I am going to the Amazon early screening. Yes, that is indeed happening. So stay tuned for that, plus other bonus content. I'll probably end up doing an episode of Flight Speed, more than likely tomorrow, talking about all the other stuff, that I was talking about before with all the Superman stuff, the marketing blitz that continues to be incredible, in my opinion, subjectively speaking. We'll see if it works or not on July 11th, but also the cord-cutting stuff I was talking about, I'll probably talk a little bit about that on Patreon as well. So thank you so much to those of you who have subscribed to patreon.com/theflightcast, and hope that you are enjoying all the bonus content and look forward to the bonus content coming up soon. All right, so for those of you that have been fans of Squadcast Media for the last number of years, 10 years amazingly, when Tim and Scott started that back in 2015, you probably more than likely already know what I'm about to say. But in case you don't, yesterday an announcement was made. Scott recorded a video that he posted to our Facebook page, the Squadcast Media Facebook page, explaining to everybody what is happening with the Squadcast Media site. And to put it simply, it is closing down. It is shuttering its doors, if you will. After July 1st, There will no longer be episodes of DC Squadcast that will be available for download off the website. After August 2nd, all of the other shows that we did, whether it's DC TV Squadcast, Enter the Night, DC Comics Squadcast, Fans Without Borders, all the other shows, will also come down as well from the site. And then at the end of August, August 29th to be exact, is when the squadcastmedia.com site will officially go dark. And this all was hashed out in a text conversation that I was definitely a part of, but really only a part of in spirit, because my schedule has just been, so topsy-turvy with me working the, early morning hours that I work at my job now over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I just have not been able to stay in touch with the guys that well, and I do really feel bad about that, because I do miss them. And it's been a minute since we've all had like a conversation, and every once in a while I'll see like a group conversation. Usually my phone is on silent at whatever point later in the night, and then I'll wake up and I'll see like 82 unread messages, like, oh, it must be the guys. All right, let's see what they were talking about. And so I read everything that they hashed out last night, and I watched Scott's video, which he explains in more detail. Like, he does a better job of explaining everything I just explained to you over on Squadcast, the Squadcast Media Facebook page, and he probably also posted it on Twitter, more than likely on social media. And he says he's gotten a lot of responses from people. Maybe even a few of you have responded to him as well. Says there's been a nice outpouring of support and appreciation from everybody that has been a fan of Squadcast Media for the last 10 years or so. And yeah, the decision was made to shut things down. There is an archiving plan in progress, if you will, to put everything on the Squadcast Media YouTube page. That's going to stay live. That's going to stay up. And we've got some stuff up there as well, some fun moments that I'm definitely going to talk about here in a minute. But the plan is to get all of that archived, all of our old shows, whatever can be archived, because there are some things that did get lost in the shuffle of time, if you will. But most of our content, and also some Patreon stuff, including Squadcast movies, which at some point, there is a hope, like Scott was saying in his video, a hope that maybe we can resume that, because that was a whole lot of fun, truthfully. I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute here. But there is a plan to archive that stuff and get it all up on the Squadcast Media YouTube page in the coming weeks and probably months, if you will, hopefully, as things shut down on the main site. So that's the official announcement with respect to Squadcast Media. And because of that, I wanted to talk about my old podcast buddies, my old podcast brothers, if you will, and pay tribute to them and that network, because literally, I mean this 1000%, this particular show that you're listening to right now does not exist if not for the guys over at Squadcast Media. And the backstory for how I got involved is, it's a fan backstory. Seriously, it's something that I think kind of, people, some of you may already know it, but this really started for me 9 years ago, back in 2016, oddly enough, with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Yes, all roads point to BVS, because I saw that movie. Shonda and I went and saw that movie a couple of days before, like, the big release, if I remember correctly. They did an early release for it. It was, like, during the week in March, like March 22nd, 23rd, something like that, right? It was originally out, officially on March 25th. We go and see that movie, and I've talked before about how when we saw that movie, the theater crowd that we had enjoyed it, applauded at the end of the movie, enjoyed the film, right? We left that movie like, wow, we just saw a really badass Batman and Superman movie with Wonder Woman and Doomsday and all this, and it's great. Can't wait for the next one, right? And then we go home and we just see all manner of firebombing and destruction from critics, bloggers, fanboys. So many people hated it and just wanted to kill it with fire. And that started this procession of me getting into protracted Facebook arguments for like the next couple of months with people about how, defending this movie, right? Talking about why I liked it, why it's good, why it's not sacrilege, why it isn't this, why it isn't that. And I'm talking to people I don't know. I'm talking to friends that I do know that are just, showing themselves to be gatekeepers. And it was just a crappy time, to be honest with you, with respect to that, because I really enjoyed the film. We actually went and saw it a second time, saw it twice in theaters, and I really did like the theatrical cut. And then a few months later, however long ago, like that summer, was when the Ultimate Edition was released, and we heard about how it was longer, right? And it's 3 hours and 2 minutes as opposed to 2 hours and 34 minutes for the theatrical cut. And I remember it got released digitally, like overseas, I think internationally. And I rode the high seas and found a perfectly pristine digital copy. And I stayed up late one night and I watched the whole thing in one shot because I don't piecemeal movies like that. I watched all 3 hours and 2 minutes. And I mean, my level of fury at the 30 minutes that had been removed from that film. Like, I'm sitting there the whole time, like, I cannot believe that of all the 30 minutes they could have taken it, they should have kept all 30 of those minutes in that film, right? And so that was my perspective with respect to that film. And it was getting to the point where, like, podcasts that I was listening to, I was having to, like, stop listening to them because all it would take was for one of them to make one disparaging comment about Batman v Superman, and I just would bring my mood down for that whole show and for wherever those hosts were. It was just like, nah, I'm not dealing with this toxicity anymore. And then one day, while I was searching for DC podcasts to listen to, because even that was kind of a minefield in terms of people feeling one way or the other about the movie, I find this show called Suicide Squadcast. And it's these guys, Tim and Scott, and they did an episode called Funnel Fairy Butter Bar, which this did two things. One, it solved a mystery for me because for the life of me, I had no idea what Alfred was saying when he was testing the voice changer, right? At the beginning of the movie, trying to test the microphone in Batman's collar, right? I had no idea that he was saying Funnel Fairy Butter Bar. I'm like, what is it? I can't, it's unintelligible. And so it answered that question for me. And then I listened to the episode, and it's these two guys that are gushing about the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it was such a breath of fresh air to hear people that enjoyed the damn movie and appreciated the Ultimate Edition of the movie. And so that turned into my number one podcast, really my only podcast that I was listening to. I ditched all of my other shows that I had been listening to at that time. I said, screw these gatekeepers. I'm listening to Tim and Scott going forward. And I would listen every week. Like, at the time, the apartment that we were living in did not have a washer and dryer, so I'm at the laundromat listening to Tim and Scott talk about DC movies and DC TV and all that stuff, right? And sometimes this other dude, Brent, would join in, and it'd be the three of them talking about DC stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, great. I love this show. This is awesome. And then sometime after that, I want to say it was after Suicide Squad actually released, if I'm not mistaken, in that August, like around the time, around fall, they put out some feelers on Twitter because they were looking to expand their podcast network. And specifically, they wanted to do a show. They wanted to add a show about DC TV, specifically at this time, the CW shows. Because the CW, the Arrowverse was, expanding at will and had I think they had 4 shows because if I remember at that time, they had Arrow, they had Flash, they had Legends of Tomorrow, and they were adding Supergirl because Supergirl had been, its first season premiered on CBS, and they were bringing it over to the CW. So they wanted to expand because Tim and Scott couldn't necessarily go in depth on all the TV stuff. They wanted to keep focus on the movies and films, and also they wanted to do a comic show. So they put out feelers for anybody that was interested in podcasting to contact them and see about, joining the network. And I remember being scared shitless to contact them. And I remember Shonda kind of helped talk me into it, just screw up your courage, just stop being afraid. You want a podcast, you want to do this stuff, you want to talk about this, you're passionate about this, just go ahead and do it. And I had started the Flightcast by then, and I was writing blog posts, and I was trying to do YouTube videos as well. I didn't do a whole lot. I did a smattering of them defending the DCEU and whatnot. But I finally, got the courage to send a message to Tim, and then I forget how long ago, it wasn't that long after that, I talked to him on Skype, had a really good conversation with him for the first time. I was nervous as hell, man. These are people I don't know, and I only have heard their voice for the last however many weeks. Hey, you've been, and I told him, I was like, I love your show, and just, it's a saving grace. I'm glad that you guys really love the BVS and, are big into the DCEU and all that, because I really was, and still am to this day, truthfully. And then after I talked to Tim, I remember that was a late night conversation that went about an hour or so. I ended up talking to Brent a couple days later because he was the one that was going to be my co-host for DC TV Squadcast. And so the idea was, all right, talk to Tim and then talk to Brent and then see how, we mesh in terms of what we're going to do with respect to a DC TV Squadcast show. And that was how it started. That was literally how everything kind of coalesced and began. And I learned everything that I know, production wise and marketing wise and whatnot about podcasting from these guys, from all of them, truthfully. As far as how I set up the Flightcast, a lot of how I do it, it comes from the DNA of how the guys built Squadcast Media. So I owe that to them. And it was a really scary, like brand new thing to do that I had never done before. But I feel like I just wanted to be myself, and I just wanted to, really talk about my passion for DC, movies and TV. And that was the thing, it was like I was inhaling all of it. I was inhaling the movies, I was inhaling the shows as much as I can, right? Shonda like started watching Arrow, and we were like big into Arrow, and then I, of course moved over into Flash when they started expanding the universe, and I was really curious about Legends of Tomorrow and really liked that show. I really ended up digging that show a ton. Supergirl I was certainly interested in, so I was totally like immersed in the Arrowverse at the time, and so that's why I was like, okay, cool, I can do DC TV. Brett and I can do this show for sure, because he was all for it as well. I think that to this day, that DC TV, the Arrowverse, is probably still his favorite live action DC interpretation. In fact, I know it is, truthfully. We'll see if the DCU replaces that or not. But that was how it started, and so it just turned into me and Brent weekly, recapping DC TV. And I remember before the new season started, we actually did like recap episodes to kick off the show. We talked about all of Arrow, we talked about all of the Flash, we talked about Legends, I think, or maybe Legends hadn't premiered yet. I don't remember, but either way, like that was how it started. Was me and him co-hosting DC TV Squadcast and just watching the CW shows every week. So it's like, 2, 3, and in some cases, 3 and 4 episodes eventually, watching that show and just talking about what we liked about, Oliver Queen and, Barry Allen and Iris and like the ensemble cast and like the villains and all that stuff. And just, I would lean on him for comic knowledge because, I'm very much still kind of a comic novice. And I am absolutely a comic novice compared to the other 5 of the guys. Like all of them have read more comics than I have. And I made that clear. I told them from the beginning, I was like, listen, I got into this through the movies and like the shows and the animated series. Like that was my gateway into DC, right? It wasn't the comics. I read a smattering of comics, and I've talked before about how, like Batman Sword of Azrael, Cosmic Odyssey, which is like my favorite graphic novel of all time, and World Without a Superman / Funeral for a Friend. Those were like Christmas gifts that I got, for my birthday, and I read those, and also like the film adaptation of Batman Returns written by Denny O'Neil. Those are comics that I read as a kid, and I just reread them a bunch of times. I never read any of the runs, like the old stuff like that. It wasn't until I got older that I started reading some more stuff. But no, those guys have vastly more comic knowledge than I do. And so we were doing DC TV Squadcast, but the thing is, like we would have to like kind of shutter the show, right, for like every summer because the CW like it goes on break. There are no new episodes in June, July, and August. We got to wait till September, October for new stuff. And the thing was, Brent and I, over the course of our co-hosting, duties at Squadcast Media, we didn't always agree on everything. In fact, there were certain things with respect to the DC movies that we were like diametrically opposed to. But the one thing that we absolutely did, probably still to this day, agree on is Marvel. We were still fans of Marvel movies, right? And we didn't really have, like, it was still like primarily a DC network at the time. And so we didn't like have, we weren't going to talk about it on DC TV. So we came up with this idea like in the summer months where, there was no CW shows to talk about. We were going to do a show called Fans Without Borders. And that was predicated on the idea of, okay, those of us that enjoy Marvel and DC, because the tribalism was really ramping up and it was really getting like ugly. Like it was the tribalism in its infancy, right before it got to the fever pitch that it's at, that it's been at, for the last number of years, right? But we were all like our catchline, our tagline with that show was, "It's okay to like them all," because we did enjoy Marvel and DC. And there, as far as the DCEU is concerned, Brent likes Man of Steel. He has effusively praised that movie. He also really liked Wonder Woman, right? And so that was kind of, in fact, if I remember correctly, Wonder Woman might have been the first episode of Fans Without Borders. It was, yeah, it was the first episode of Fans Without Borders that we did. We did a review of Wonder Woman because, yeah, we started doing movie reviews for both DC and Marvel movies on that show. And initially, it was the show that we were going to do in the summers, when there wasn't a DC TV Squadcast show. But the thing is, Marvel stuff kept coming out. And we also wanted to do our own reviews on DC movies as well. So we just kept doing Fans Without Borders alongside DCTV Squadcast, and there were a good couple of years there where we were doing both shows simultaneously, like at the same time. So it's not only like reading or rather watching the Arrowverse every week, but it's also like keeping up on like the movie news and other stuff so that we can talk about that on Fans Without Borders. And we, not that we tried not to infringe on what Tim and Scott were talking about, over at DC Squadcast, but certainly the Marvel stuff. Because I followed, probably, I think out of the six of us in the network, Brent is definitely the biggest Marvel fan. I was probably the second biggest Marvel fan. I think out of all of us, me, Brent, and Scott probably watched the most Marvel. I don't know how much Jordan and Chris, the DC Comics guys, I don't know how much they watch Marvel. And I know Tim doesn't really care for Marvel all that much. Like MCU in that regard. There's certain things that he likes, other things not so much. But yeah, so that was, it turned into that, and really like at the fever pitch of the network, we were doing a good amount of shows. We were doing 4 shows like on a consistent basis. Tim and Scott were doing DC Squadcast. At the time, Suicide Squadcast, later rebranded to DC Squadcast. Brett and I were doing DC TV and Fans Without Borders, and Jordan and Chris were doing DC Comics Squadcast, and they were talking about all the comic runs. And there would be times where, crossovers would occur. I remember the very first time that we did like a crossover episode, if you will, where it was Brent and I doing an episode with Tim and Scott. And I forget what it was. I think we were talking about, was it Justice League? It might have been Justice League that we were talking about. But either way, like, I remember the first time, like, I had talked to Tim like once over the phone, because the thing was, I talked to Tim like at that point on Skype, and then after that it was really Brent that I was like conversing with on a regular basis, and I hadn't met Scott yet. And so it was one of those things where it was like I was nervous. Like I was really nervous to talk to those guys and record to those guys. Like, man, I hope they don't think I'm some kind of a schlep rock or whatever. I just want to, I want to be cool. Just want to, like not be a stick in the mud, but be myself, right? And that type of thing. And I hope that everything works out. And it did, obviously, and when we started doing Squadcast movies, when we started doing the movie reviews for Patreon, and we went through the history of comic book movies. We got like 73 movies deep on that, by the way. We did like 73 reviews of comic book movies, and we did 2 different tracks. There was the Silver Age track and then the modern track. The Silver Age track started all the way back with Superman and the Mole Men, which I was not on that review initially. But then the modern track, if I remember correctly, started with Blade, the first Blade movie, which I was on that review. I think Blade might have been the very first episode of that. And so, it was just the call would go out. Tim would send a message like, hey, who's up for this? We're going to record this episode this day. Who's up for doing this review? And I think Tim was on all of them. Tim's on all 73 reviews that we've done to this point. I probably have second most. There are a handful of ones that I didn't get a chance to do. The one that still bugs me, the one that still burns me up because they didn't answer quick enough in the text chat, was because at the time we were keeping it to like 4 hosts per episode, and it still bugs me that I missed out on Dick Tracy. I wanted to talk about Dick Tracy. I really like Dick Tracy, but either way, still, the guys did a good job with that review. But I remember like some of my favorite moments, and it's funny to talk about this now because over the last couple of years, like my job, as I've mentioned before, I have a long commute. I have like an hour-long commute from where I live to where I work. And that's, hour there, hour back. And so a lot of times, like on the way home, I will listen to old episodes of Squadcast movies. I've listened to a bunch of our old reviews, like a lot, like over and over again. And if you want to have some fun, and I imagine it's going to get posted on the site if people haven't already heard it. You want to have some fun, like listen to our review of Superman 2. Because it's me, Tim, and Scott, and the 3 of us reviewed both the Lester cut, the Richard Lester cut, the theatrical version of the film, and we reviewed the Donner cut. We gave separate ratings for each film, and that was a real interesting / contentious discussion because like Tim was almost kind of the mediator, and it wasn't like Scott and I were like yelling at each other or anything like that. No, nothing like that. But we definitely did not agree on certain perspectives because he far and away like loved so much more out of the Donner cut, and I was making arguments for things that I like better in the Lester cut. And Tim was like, all right, let's hear him out. When Scott, and I could hear Scott gnashing his teeth because at that time we weren't like doing, like we weren't on Zoom. Like Zoom, this is pre-pandemic. This is pre-2020. So Zoom wasn't as big as it is now. So we were all talking to each other audio only through like Skype and recording on like Odyssey or Audition because I have Adobe Creative Cloud. So yeah, it's just at that point I'm like, okay, does he want me kicked off the network? Like there was a part of me like in the back of my head that thought that at that time because again, it wasn't like it wasn't disrespectful and it wasn't like a shouting match or anything. I was just making my points about the Lester cut and certain parts of it that I did like and that he did not agree with. And no, but it was a fun discussion. He and I, the three of us, we went through the whole Christopher Reeve Superman gamut. And I feel like the reverse of that is also kind of like our Superman 4 Quest for Peace review because that's the one where Scott and I agreed that it's a better movie than Superman 3, and Tim does not agree with us at all. He thinks Superman 4 is by far the worst Superman film. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I love the episodes where the six of us all got together to do Batman reviews, specifically Batman 89, Batman Returns, and Batman Forever. Those are the three that all six of us got together. I still love the fact that of all the DC Comics characters that could bring us together, like the entire network together, of course, the GD Batman would get it done, no doubt about it. And the Batman 89, that was awesome. I think that's like our longest review. It's like over 2 hours, right? And it's the six of us just gushing waxing poetically about this film and how much we enjoyed it. We've all got quotables and just talking about how quotable it is. And I told my story about how, the terror that I had and the white knuckle phobia of Jack Nicholson's Joker that I had when the movie first released. And it was just a really fun discussion, a really awesome discussion. We had a lot of really fun and awesome discussions. And it was at the time, our schedules were definitely more aligned and, more like coalesced, if you will. I wasn't working the crazy hours that I work now, early in the morning, and, Tim and the others weren't quite as busy with what they were doing. Like, obviously, life changes over time, and certainly 2020 changed a whole lot of things for us. They most certainly did. And I remember 2020, that became a time where like all of us were like, okay, well, we're still going because we're not going anywhere, right? So we're at home. We're definitely gonna have time to like do Squadcast movie reviews, and we totally did. And some of our more fun reviews, like I think Catwoman, we did during that year. I think Meteor Man was another one around that time, but between 2020 and 2021 that we did. That's another fun one that I really enjoyed. That was me, Tim, Scott, and Chris. Me, Tim, Scott, and Chris did a good amount of those. I feel like Chris is probably like fourth, like he or either third or fourth. I don't know how many like between him and Scott that they did. Scott probably did more. Scott's probably third. Chris is probably fourth in terms of how many reviews that he did. But they're really fun, like lively discussions, and I love talking about those movies with those guys because there's a lot of stuff. The great discussions are when others think of something that you don't think of and you're like, wow, that's a really damn good point. Well, I did not even catch that, or I didn't catch this line, or I didn't see that right. And those guys were really good at that. They are really good at that, and they made for some really awesome discussions, some really fun discussions, even the movies we didn't care for, right? And one of the things I love, I think the two reviews that are probably like the lowest on our list are definitely Howard the Duck and Son of the Mask. Now, Howard the Duck was like, that was a crazy one because I remember I got a flat tire at work that night before recording that, and so I was late getting to the recording. I was like, hey, I got a situation. I'll tell you guys all about it. I told the guys about it, and like we recorded a special Patreon episode telling my story of this arduous task of me putting air in my tire, and then we launch into this review, this rather scathing review of Howard the Duck, because none of us liked it. None of us cared about it. But you know what? Here's the thing. One of the things that I loved about, like, when we did that review, and we did this for, like, any of these movies, like, any movie that we didn't necessarily care for, we made it, especially a movie like Howard the Duck that has a cult following, we always made it a point to say, listen, we don't care for this movie. We don't like this movie, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong for liking it. You don't take what we say, like, derogatorily. We're not trying to fan flames. We're not trying to piss anybody off. Like, this is just how we feel about it, right? So it's all subjective. I got to use that phrase a ton. And we always made that clear, right? Listen, we're not gatekeeping. We're not being the same type of people that we, don't like to deal with when it comes to the DCEU and the Snyderverse stuff. No, we're gonna tell you how we feel. We're gonna be honest with you, but you are welcome to disagree with any of our feelings with respect to that. And I love that we always made that clear. In episodes that where we didn't necessarily agree or we didn't necessarily like the film that we watched. And so it was a lot of fun. A lot of great, energetic, and like respectful discussions. I remember in 2020, one of the more fun things that we did was the year of DC fandom, the first year of DC fandom. That was awesome because it was literally like we were attending a virtual con. It was all of us, and like we had the schedule, we're all at home, but like it was almost like, okay, you know what, we're watching this panel here, let's meet back here, we're gonna watch this panel, we're gonna watch that panel. And like the way that they did DC fandom that year was really awesome. They didn't really recapture that glory the second time they did it. And now with everything going back to being in person, not so much of a need for that anymore, even though it was an awesome event when they did it. But yeah, that was really cool because literally it was like, okay, we'll sign on at this time and we'll watch this panel. We recorded our trailer reaction, our first reaction to the first trailer for the Batman, which at the time, like we were blown away because they'd only filmed like a quarter of the movie at that point. At least that's what we had heard. And we were just like so enamored with what we saw in that trailer. And that reaction is definitely, I think, still up on our Squadcast movies page, if I'm not mistaken, on YouTube. That was a lot of fun. That was really awesome. And over time, Brent, he had to drop off of co-hosting duties for DC TV Squadcast, and so I took it over, and I started like in the beginning, like I was doing certain, like there were certain shows that like when we started expanding outside of the Arrowverse, there were other shows, like we did talk about, I think Gotham. I think we did talk about Gotham. We talked about those 5 seasons. But I remember Scott and I talked about Krypton. Pour one out for Krypton, man. That show, that show was so good. Ended way too early. My goodness, really, really enjoyed that show. But Scott and I talked about that. I remember it was him, me, and Jordan that talked about Harley Quinn animated series, and through that I was also able, and I forget which, I think Tim or Scott, whichever one of them set this up, they were able, or maybe it was Brent, I don't remember who did it, but one of the guys, like they actually set up an interview for me. I actually got to interview Jefferson Friedman, the composer for the music for Harley Quinn animated series, and that was a cool interview. That was a cool episode of DCTV Squadcast to do, because there were music tracks that like that I was able to use, that like he sent over like as like sample tracks that I was able to use in the episode. It was really cool. That was like one of the times where I like felt official, like, hey, I'm getting to talk to one of the guys involved in a show that we're watching. It's active and it's awesome, and that was a really cool moment. I remember Chris and we covered Swamp Thing, and that was such a crazy emotional ride with respect to those episodes of DCTV because we loved the pilot episode, and then right after it comes out, we're told, oh, well, there's not going to be any more of it. Like, the rest of this season you're watching will be all of it. And we were reacting in real time to why in the hell would they do this? And, oh my God, this show is amazing. Like, I can't believe they're not going to continue with this. Whatever excuses they gave about budget and tax cuts in North Carolina and all that mess. Ridiculous. But we had fun doing that. I remember, he definitely want to bring this up. The crossover episodes. Like when we did the big DC TV, the big Arrowverse crossover episode, Scott would join us for those. And it was me, him, and Brent talking about Crisis on Earth X, which that to me I think is still, like, I know Crisis on Infinite Earths is amazing. I'm not saying it wasn't. But for me, Crisis on Earth X is probably still my favorite of the big crossovers in the Arrowverse. I love that one. Probably my favorite sequence in that whole thing is that church fight. For anybody that has seen Crisis on Earth X, the church fight where literally like Barry and Iris are getting married, and the alternate, the other versions of Oliver and Supergirl show up, and are immediately like they're going to start a fight, and then it goes to commercial, and then they come out of commercial break, and the entire, like, that whole section, like from commercial break to next commercial break, is just a balls to the wall massively powered fight. Everybody, it was like Avengers level for like the DCCW for the Arrowverse, and it was just to see everybody come together from all the different shows, and like to see Supergirl fighting, alongside Flash, and to see Green Arrow fighting alongside them, and to see Vibe and Frost and everybody else fighting. It was so good. It was so amazing. I love that sequence. It was such fun. And the three of us had a ton of fun talking about that, had a ton of fun talking about the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and the incredible, at the time, the incredible DCEU cameo, that whole thing with the Flash that they kept secret. The fact that it ended with them finally bringing Supergirl into the Prime universe with everybody else, because they started off on a different Earth, and they used that as an opportunity to merge Supergirl's world with everybody else. Like that, and just, I remember we talked about Elseworlds when they brought in Batwoman, and it was a lot of fun. It was a hell of a lot of fun, and I mean, it wasn't work. It was never drudgery, and it was never something that just became like, at least for me, it never became like a responsibility. And I don't feel like that was the case for the other guys either. I felt like the passion was there. And if you listen to, like, you can listen to podcasts and you can hear people that are just going through the motions. You can hear people that are just doing it for content, don't necessarily have the passion. All of us have the passion. And I think all of us still, to some degree, definitely have the passion for the content, for DC, for the characters, for the source material, and for the adaptations, right? We all still have that energy, even though our lives have taken us in different directions, if you will. And, times change. I tried to do, like, after all of that, I started trying to do, like, some solo episodes of DC TV where I was getting caught up. I remember I did, talked about, I started to catch up on the DC animated universe, and I talked about Superman the animated series because I finally watched that. I talked about Batman Beyond, finally watched that. So I was, motoring through and trying to keep that alive. And then Scott would pop in, and that was the last couple of things that we did for DC TV was him and I talking about different shows. The last one we did, we talked about Superman and Lois. I think we've talked about all 4 seasons of that show. And we recap seasons 3 and 4 into the ending. That's the last episode at DC TV Squadcast that we did. The last episode of Fans Without Borders that Brent and I did was the Batman. We did a review of the Batman, and that was a good one to go out on because we both really enjoyed that film. And it was a whole lot of fun. And for me, I do wish that I miss those guys. I miss them a lot, truthfully. Without them, like, I don't have the podcasting knowledge and experience that I have now. I mean, I've done over 200 episodes of just this show. This is episode 209 of the Flightcast. And, that's not counting all the episodes of, like, Flightbox and Flight Chat and Hexagon and other stuff that I've done. And not even counting the Patreon episodes. Like I said, I have, like, almost 200 pieces of Patreon content that's just Patreon that hasn't been posted topside, right? I've done, like, so much podcasting in, like, the last 4 or 5 years just on my own. And I will tell you that absolutely none of it would be possible if it wasn't for those guys helping me and, like, pretty much, like, giving me the experience on, how to converse and how to edit and, like, how to put things together, and also marketing. I watched what they did, on social media and on Facebook, and, how Brent and Tim and the other guys orchestrated it and organized it all on the website, using Squarespace and Libsyn and stuff like that. Like, there's so much that I learned through them, with them, at their behest, and I am eternally grateful for that. There's no way that this show exists without them. And the hope at some point, if stars can align, maybe we can get together and, resume our course on Squadcast movies. That'd be awesome. I would love to do that because we were like, I feel like that was the time where, like, all of us were, like, firing on all cylinders, and we had a lot of, like, great discussions and a lot of awesome opinions. And yeah, I am kind of saying that because I've been re-listening to the episodes for the last couple of years and just like, wow, this was really good. That was really good. I love that. I love what Scott said here. I love what Tim said there. I love what Brent said there, and that kind of thing, right? And Jordan and Chris always bring in like their energy to it as well. Like, we all brought amazing energy to it, and it was just a really, really fun thing to be a part of. And to really build a circle, to really build a friendship of fandom around that, around our passions. That's something that, you see people do it in pockets, right? But maybe people don't do that enough in fandoms, right? Like-minded individuals that, can be rational and have rational discussions and not just revert to toxicity and nonsense when it comes to talking about this stuff. And no matter what, like, I know that I can, if I want to have a chat, or if we were recording anything, or we're having a discussion, there were definitely times where, we didn't all agree on certain things, but we could keep it respectful, right? Because we weren't here to, not be friends. We weren't here to not, talk about our passions. We weren't here not to have fun with what we do. We were here to definitely, like, have fun with what we do and enjoy talking about what we talk about. And, it's also, through these guys at Squadcast Media, through my podcast brothers, I was able to meet others in our circle, right? It's because of them that I was able to, you know, finally get on Vodka Stream and talk to Dave the Film Junkie. And I was on that panel for, I feel like a good year or so before my schedule started changing, right? And that was fun. That was a whole lot of fun. I let Dave is awesome. And Stephen Colbert and those guys at World's Finest, Wonder Meg, all those guys, right? Like, that, and I met a number of them in person, right? Because when they started doing 2021, when they started doing the AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, they started doing the screening events here in Michigan. They did the BVS Comes Home event, where this was like 2 weeks before Zack Snyder's Justice League released, where they did a special screening of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice at my favorite theater, the Birmingham Palladium, in Birmingham, Michigan. And like, we did, that was where I was able to meet a lot of those people in person. I met the Colberts, I met Wonder Meg, I met Anthony, I met Enosh from Poindexter Lounge, and a number of those guys. Like that, there was a number of them had come up here, right? And I'm the one from Michigan, so it's like, of course I'm going to drive down there. Of course I'm going to see that. And then later that year, for Thanksgiving, like around the Thanksgiving holiday, they did another screening for Zack Snyder's Justice League, and that's when I met Tim in person. I met him and his wife in person, and he's the only member of Squadcast Media that I've actually met in person to this day. I do hope that at some point in the not too distant future I can change that and I can meet the others, because I know some of them have met in person before. But that's the other amazing thing about technology, and the other amazing thing about fandom is, like-minded individuals that live across the country. And literally, we all live like in very different parts of the country. A couple of us live in the Midwest. One of us lives in the Deep South. Actually, two of us live really in the southern part of the country, and one of us lives out closer to the east, if you will, or Rust Belt, I guess is the best way that I could put it. So we're all in different parts of the country, and for us to be able to get together and put all the effort and energy that we did into that network for 10 years, I mean, it's a testament to those guys, and I am eternally grateful to them for the knowledge and the experience and the openness and just being able to it really, for me, helped me as a fan, like a big time, especially with all the DC stuff that I've talked about, guys, all the DC stuff that has gone on, the way the DCU went and how all that was going. A lot of times, Squadcast Media was like the sounding board for me, right? Like, I knew that I could, I had friends, that I could, that shared my interests, that I could at the very least talk about what I enjoyed instead of focusing so much on, the negatives and whatnot. And the way that I was feeling about things was the same way that they were feeling. And maybe they felt stronger than I did about certain things, but at least I knew that they were, friends that I had throughout this, that I could share those moments with, like when Zack Snyder's Justice League released. And that was just, so many, myself, Tim, Scott, Chris, Jordan, we were all in just heaven that particular week, if you will, with respect to that. We all gushed over that film, and how excited we were that it finally existed and it was tangible and it was there. And honestly, we rode the roller coaster of fandom, along with the DCEU, and just, all of our like fan reactions to it, and also kind of like absorbing everybody else's reactions to it as well. I feel like we might have been a sounding board for some of you with respect to that, because we all, we're part of the same group and we're reacting the same way, and we see the stuff that's going on, and all the cultist nonsense and how things kind of evolved a certain way, and we really tried to steer clear of it and keep rational, calm heads about it. And I feel like all of us did. We definitely did, and many of our mutuals and constituents to this day most certainly did, and stayed out of the nastiness of it, even though we saw the nastiness up close and personal. And I will never forget Like when released the Snyder Cut, like when that started, I will never forget this because I remember like when Justice League first released. You can go back this will probably get posted like on Squadcast Media on our YouTube. You can go back. You can even go to the website now while it's still up for the next couple months or so, and you can go back and listen to the Fans Without Borders review of Justice League. Me and Brent did, and you'll hear me gush about that movie. You will. You'll hear me talk about how I really enjoyed it, this and that, and that was just. I call it cognitive delusion, but I remember it was such a thing. Scott and I had a Patreon discussion because he and I were diametrically opposed, but he just did not understand where my perspective on it was coming from. And what it really was, and I've talked about this before, and I wrote a piece about this on Flightcast like 6 months later. I said, I was really I couldn't believe that what had happened with respect to what I was hearing, with respect to what people were saying about how the production went down and what Warner Brothers had actually done when Zack Snyder stepped down and all that, right? I didn't want to believe it. And then it just really, for months, it was like, between hearing what I heard like through the grapevine and then also from, Tim and Scott also were just like, hey, you know what, Ray, there's this, there's that. The both of them, because they knew how much I enjoyed the Snyderverse stuff, and they were just really like trying to, open my eyes to what was going on. And then it was like 6 months later when I was just like, you know what, yep, I can't ignore this any further. Like there was just too much evidence. There was just too much stuff. And I read, and we chronicled this. Scott and I had discussions about it, and I talked to him and Tim about it. And it was just like, okay, you know what? I'm on board. I'm all in. This is amazing. This is ridiculous. I can't believe like what has happened. I can't ignore it any further. And so that was when I joined the movement, if you will. And then, we all got to, like revel in the glory of the fact that, the absolutely miraculous circumstances of the Snyder Cut actually being released and being, tangibly existing so that it sits on my shelf to this day. In place of Justice League, I will never own Justice League ever again. I will only own Zack Snyder's Justice League. That is all I need as far as the DCEU is concerned. And yeah, just how we all felt about that and the shared passion with respect to that. Those are moments that I will always remember as a fan, that I will always enjoy. And, I feel like, guys, a lot of, what happened with Squadcast Media, it also kind of followed the progression of what happened with the DCEU, because we largely loved that interpretation of DC live action. And so I feel like, as the fan base went in terms of like energies, especially after the changes were made and it became the Walter Hamada show, and it just was, kind of going along aimlessly without a real plan whatsoever, right? Like we all just kind of like the energy just kind of was zapped. And I was still watching the movies, but I couldn't deny what was going on with the fandom. And it was just like, nah, the juice isn't there, not like it was for those first couple of movies, right? I think Aquaman was like the last gasp of that. And then after that, it just, really fell off, and that it's sad that it went that way. And I'm still a DC fan. Of course, I'm going to be front and center for the start of the DCU here in about a month, to see Superman and see how this iteration is going to go. But I have all 15 DCEU films. I do. And, I have my preference. I think Zack Snyder's Justice League is the cream of the crop, and Zack Snyder's trilogy certainly is the cream of the crop, along with Wonder Woman, and, the first Shazam film. I do like Aquaman. I know that, there's some divided opinions, even among our Squadcast Media brethren, with respect to that film, but I still find, things to largely enjoy about those films, right? And that was the apex of what we did. That was the apex of our energy at Squadcast Media, was during that time. And so, not to say that we can't do anything else in the future, and I hope we do. I really do. Like these are guys that I want to stay in touch with. All of them, seriously. Like last time I talked to Brent, nowadays I feel like during football season, because he's a big Kansas City Chiefs fan, and I'm a Lions fan. And now that the Lions are good, right? Because first number of years that we were doing, podcasting and whatnot, Lions were terrible, Chiefs were getting better, right? But now both the Chiefs and the Lions are good, so now I can talk about, hey, we're good, you're good, here's what's going on. So a lot of times we've texted back and forth about NFL stuff, but it's been a minute since I've talked to him. It's been a minute since I've talked to any of the guys, and I feel like it's too long, like with respect to that. So I do hope that at some point schedules can align. I've talked about, my scheduling issues before, and, how I can, try and hopefully curtail that in the not too distant future to help free up some more of my time. And things have changed, life has changed, but it would be great if we could all reconnect and regather in some form, going forward, and I'm glad that we're, actively going to keep this alive on the YouTube channel, even though the website itself is going to go dark, because I feel like we did create an awesome community, between the six of us, and certainly everybody that listened to us, all of our listeners, everybody, especially those of you that listen to this show that followed me from, Fans Without Borders, from DCTV Squadcast, from the Patreon over to here. I mean, I am eternally grateful for all of you. And I know that we're all eternally grateful for everybody that listened to us for 10 years, for as much as we were putting out the content and talking passionately about movies, TV, and other sorted media with respect to DC and all that. So, I thank you. I thank any of you that were Squadcast Media fans, or anybody that was interested in that. If you're somebody that wasn't a fan of that, I do implore you, while the site is up, you can go check it out, listen to some of the stuff that we talked about, and go to the YouTube page. Like, when we get everything archived, definitely listen to some of our discussions, because we had some really awesome discussions, and some real, like, off the cuff fun stuff. And it's just fans being fans, right? It's what we wish all of fandom was like. I really feel like the six of us are what we wish all of fandom was like. We don't always agree, but we all have the passion. We can all be respectful, and we can all, like, give our energy and our efforts into talking about what we love, instead of focusing so much about what we don't love in that regard. And you wish all of fandom could be like that, but at the very least, if you can find a pocket of people that are good people, that you can converse about this with, whether you're podcasting with them or not, or whether you're talking to them on social media, whatever it is, you find that group of people, you stick with that group of people. And yeah, these are 5 friends that I made, over the last decade, that I, hope that I can stay in touch with, that I hope that we can do some more stuff in the future, whatever iteration that becomes, whatever Squadcast Media evolves into, if it stays what it is on the YouTube page, or if it evolves into something else, I do hope I can stay in touch with them. I really do. And I need to figure out my own scheduling stuff so that I can stay in touch with these guys. Because, yeah, it's a lot of fun. And they're great guys. I love all of them. And I am eternally grateful for what they've done for me as a podcaster, and how they've helped me along, and, the friendship and the fandom that we've all been able to share over the last decade. So my hat's off to them, my tribute to them, and the work that we did, and everything that we did over at Squadcast Media, for sure. So yeah, I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Flightcast, my ode to Squadcast Media, if you will. Thank you so much for listening to this show. I hope that I didn't necessarily bore you guys with any of this. I feel like there was some cool fan stuff to talk about as far as the progression of things going on. And there's so many other stories, probably some things that I completely forgot that the other guys will remember if I get a chance to talk to them here in the not too distant future. But thank you so much for listening to this show, listening to the Flightcast, and supporting the Flightcast and whatnot. And thank you to those of you that supported Squadcast Media over the years and are still fans of everything that we all did. Myself, Tim, Scott, Brent, Jordan, Chris, all of us, thank you so much for that. If you have any thoughts with respect to any of your Squadcast Media memories, or if there's anything else you want to talk about, on Flight Chat with respect to movies, TV, and other sorted media, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast. You can find me on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can post on the Flightcast YouTube page underneath the posting for this particular episode. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.